Thank all of you for joining us this evening. To refresh your memories and to inform those who may not have attended a UN Pathways Ambassador Forum before, the format of the evening will take the form of a conversation between Ambassador Picco and myself. After we rattle on at some length, we'll throw the evening open for questions from the audience. And then at the end, there will be a dinner reception to which you are all invited just down the hall on the other side of the mansion. I would ask that all of you check your mobile phones and the like, make sure they're turned off. We are video recording this event, and it would be great if there weren't beeps and buzzes and things. Okay. Ambassador, thank you so much for coming to Fairleigh Dickinson University. We've heard your bio, but the bio doesn't tell us why. I would love to know, and I'm sure our audience would love to know, why public service and why international affairs?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for giving me that opportunity, Mr. Vice Provost. So why? I was born and raised in Monaco, and I used to say that I grew up in the corridors of town hall. My mom was a civil servant, and I always wanted to become a civil servant myself. So when I graduated from high school, I first wanted to follow my friends and go to a short graduate studies, but my parents said, no, it's either a preparatory school for business school or law. So I went to the law school in Nice, and then I really preferred public law. So, and in the third year, I realized that what I liked the most was European law, because at the time it was the beginning of the European Union, not even the European Union at that time, but in international affairs. So I went to Paris, where I pursued my graduate studies, and then I came back to Monaco, and I started working in what we call the department, but it's the Ministry of Finance and Budget, and I was in charge of all legal issues, from business to money laundering, and very, very big subjects for a young civil servant. Also insurance law, also, the three liberties of the European Union. It was quite complicated. And then Monaco became a member state of the United Nations. And I was given the opportunity to come to New York with the first national to be appointed ambassador to an international organization. And I've been there since then. It was beyond my wildest dreams as a student. So yes, it's really great.
You mentioned European law, and of course Monaco is a European country, but not a member of the European Union. Is that, it's obviously by design, but could you talk a little bit about your country's role in Europe and how the relationship between Monaco and the European Union works?
Well, first of all, and as Dr. Moreau indicated, we are part of the French territory. We have, well, of course, maritime access and the airspace above it, but through the years, we have 4 main bilateral treaties with France that used to govern banking, insurance, pharmacy, and customs. So technically, Monaco is part of the French territory when it comes to customs and banking.
So there's no border controls?
There is no border control, and as Dr. Moreau also said, it's the second smallest country. It's smaller than Central Park. It's not It's almost 2 square kilometers, so it's not even 1 square mile kilometer. But of course, with more integration of the European Union, we needed to, because all the countries, the 28 countries, somehow lost some of their sovereignty on many areas. So we needed to be, it became more and more complicated. So a few years ago, we started to ask the EU itself, the Commission, to have a specific agreement, because we had managed to have some technical agreement regarding pharmacy and some products, but it's becoming more and more complicated. And the EU, we are not part of the, how do you call it, the AELE, the free exchange like Switzerland and Liechtenstein. So we have started a conversation, not alone, because San Marino, Andorra, and us are the 3 countries that are under regular talks with the EU. The idea is to have a global agreement with the EU, encompassing all the subjects that are of interest, but at the same time, because of the main liberties and the specificity of each of our each small countries in Europe, you know, everyone has different priorities. And for us, because again, as Dr. Moreau said, you know, we are a minority in our own country. Imagine that the population of Monaco, it's one of the most populated countries in the world, is 38 and something thousand people, and only 9,000 of them are citizens. So there is a positive discrimination to protect our minority when it comes to access a certain profession like pharmacy, to be a doctor, and many different regulations. You also need to know that businesses must be approved, so you cannot just incorporate an entity and open a business in Monaco. You need to be approved by the government, and this is to be sure that this business is not going to be used for ways that Monaco, the government, doesn't want to. So, and I should have started with that, because Monaco being an hereditary and constitutional monarchy, the Grimaldis family has reigned over the principality for more than 700 years. And we have always have special relations with France through the centuries. And so, you know, but we need to have something, so it's complicated. It was already complicated, but you can imagine that the Commission, with all the Brexit issues, the future agreement concerning Andorra, Monaco and San Marino are not the main priority. So our hope is that by the end of the Juncker Commission, during the fall of 2019, we will have a framework to move more ahead of a specific agreements with the Commission itself.
And would the bilateral agreements with France at that point phase out, or will there always be a necessity of such agreements?
Well, the bilateral agreements with France have allowed us so far, you know, especially when it comes to banking and all the regulations, it's the French Banking Commission is responsible for overseeing the banks in Monaco. So we also have, contrary to some other small states like San Marino, agreements for banking, and we are applying all the standards of the OECD, and we have been cleared by all the big regulations. You know that the exchange of information now it is compulsory, and this is totally.
It's compulsory here as well if we want to do business in Europe.
So it's we comply with all those regulations, and you know there is no other way, because the US is putting a lot of pressure on Europe regarding those aspects, and the G20 and the finance ministers always look at small states with weak regulations. So, but for Monaco, because
that's where you go and you hide your money.
Yeah, well, but you cannot hide your money in Monaco. You know, there is the automatic exchange of information. So that's we are in the clear.
Interesting. I did not know that there were only 9,000 citizens out of the population of some 38, 39,000. Is it possible to gain or acquire citizenship in Monaco, or must you be born a citizen?
This is a very interesting part of the law, because over the last few decades, the law has really evolved. So before, you had to be born in Monaco from parents who were the father who was Monegasque.
Where the father was?
Yes, but if you were born from a father who was not a Monegasque, but the mother was for the second generation a citizen of Monaco, then you could ask to have the citizenship.
But it would not be automatic.
It wasn't automatic. Now, and it has evolved so much, because that was my case when I went to university. I started university as a French citizen. And by the time I gave birth to my son, who was born in France, he was Monegasque right away. So it has really evolved over the years, and now, you know, we even if a foreign citizen marries a Monegasque woman, after 10 years of marriage, he can ask for the citizenship.
Okay, that's a generous policy.
Well, this is about gender equality.
Well, that came up as well in the succession to the throne, did it not?
Yeah, well, the Constitution, the 1962 Constitution was modified in 2002, and so you know, it's all the succession to the throne is regulated through the laws that is specific to the crown. And yes, it's a hereditary and constitutional monarchy, so it's direct lineage.
But once only the offspring of a father who was prince,
yes,
could be prince,
yes.
And now the offspring of a
married, because Catholicism is a religion of state. So, but there is of course a freedom of religion, and well, we don't have a mosque, but we have a mosque. We have an Anglican church. We have yes.
So I was reading about the history of Monaco, and learned that among the founders were a Genoese family. Is there still a sense of relationship or kindred nationhood with Italy, or is the culture much more French-oriented?
Well, we are, I would say, from Southern Europe. So, of course, because of our history, as you rightly mentioned, France and Italy are the main, you know, neighbors. So those are the two countries that have a physical embassy in Monaco, and our population of 38,000 people, a little more, doubles every day from commuters coming to work to Monaco. So we have a social security agreement both with France and Italy for those workers, and yes, it's because we are halfway between the Italian border and the Nice airport. So, and I have to mention that if we don't have an airport, we have an heliport. So you can still arrive in Monaco by the air.
By helicopter?
Air, yes, by helicopter. And again, we are working to, now you can do your immigration at the heliport.
Okay. I'll keep that in mind. I'll have my helicopter fueled up and ready for a visit. I wonder, when we think about sovereignty, and this is a question that every country grapples with. Sovereignty entailing, being ruled by your own laws, not laws that others make for you. Sovereignty understood as controlling your own borders. Sovereignty understood as being independent of other countries, of other states. That seems really hard to do when you're a very small country. What are the challenges, or what have been the challenges faced by Monaco in maintaining sovereignty, and how have those challenges been confronted?
I think that through the centuries, as I said before, we always had special relations with France, and we have now, above when we modified the constitution in 2002, there was a renewed administrative agreement between the two countries that they meet regularly, both with Italy and with France, but more with France because we are really part of a sub-economical region, and when President Hollande, the former French president, visited Monaco, he recognized the economic importance of Monaco for the sub-region. So I think this is probably, it's difficult on one way because we are so small, but the French Republic ensures our protection in case of attack. On the contrary, because we benefit from that protection, we cannot go against, at the international level, of the highest interest of France, which makes sense. But it's a cultural, we are the same. The French is the official language. So of course, the Monegasque, being, as you said, from a Genovese family, and the language is, it's a dialect from Genova. Mm-hmm. So it's still, it's taught in school. It can be an option at the baccalaureate. So we are, I used to say, to make a joke, that we are more stubborn, even more stubborn in sports than the French people. Oh. So it's, but culturally we share the same values, and we work very, very closely. So.
You mentioned that there's a security arrangement with France. Does that mean there are French military forces based in Monaco, or only that France is pledged to protect Monaco should the need arise?
So we don't have any military forces, but the police in Monaco, those are French citizens, but it's the Monegasque police is under the responsibility of the Minister of Interior, who is a Monegasque minister. So it's totally independent, but we work, for example, let's say that we have a soccer game where a lot of people are going to come. Well, it happened, unfortunately. So, those two police work together. Uh-huh. So you have the préfet, it's called in France, working with the government and the Minister of Interior, more particularly to organize those joint protections. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Does Monaco have its own military at all, a small army or navy?
No, the prince has the carabinier, which is his personal guard, but it's of course it's a military, and they do the change of the guard, and they have an amazing orchestra, but they are trained professionals. Yes, it's. Yeah. They are called the guard of the prince, carabinier du prince.
But they won't be volunteering for UN peacekeeping operations in the near future?
Well, not them, but this is something that I've been trying to talk about, because more and more the UN is evolving towards prevention, and when a country tries to to overcome a conflict. I think that the most important thing is to secure an organization of the state, basic rule and safety and security for the people. So in that case, a police force that is trained and that is trained to respect human rights from the start. This is very important. So I do believe, because Monaco, part of the attractivity of Monaco is safety. And we don't take these things lightly in Monaco. You know, there are security cameras like everywhere. The crime is very low. You know, it's so you can basically walk at night and be safe and have your property safe. So this is very important, and this is something that the government always invests in because it's part of the attractivity of the country. Not only the sun.
Not only the sun.
And it's been raining a lot. People have been complaining.
It's probably good for the land. Dr. Moro mentioned something else that I didn't. He mentioned many things that I did not know, but he mentioned that citizens of Monaco are not allowed in the casinos in Monte Carlo. Yeah. That's terrible.
Well, no, I think that's, a lot of citizens from Monaco work in the casino. Okay. It has always been part of the social aspect, you know, it's one of, like the civil service is one of the most important field of employment for citizens. But because we are given some huge advantages, especially the government doesn't raise income taxes, neither on its citizens or in foreigners. So the only people who pay taxes in Monaco is, well, the American, but they pay to their home country, and the French people who were not established before 1962 also pay taxes as if they were living in France. But the government itself doesn't raise income tax. We have a tax on the benefits of companies. So that's the reason why, you know, you're not supposed to go and lose your money on the casino.
Really?
Because I don't believe in people making money out of the casino. Otherwise, the casinos would be all bankrupt.
Are the casinos owned by foreign entities?
No.
Or are they owned by...
They are owned by the Société des Mains de Mer, which has been the same company since they started the spa at the beginning of the last century. And this has been part of the history of Monaco when Prince Charles III created developed that hotel infrastructure and the first casino. But nowadays, this is not the most important source of revenue for the state. The most important source of revenue is value-added tax and on transactions and on all the goods that you consume.
So similar to the sales tax that our students might be familiar with.
Or real estate taxes when you purchase an entity.
Thinking of the economy of Monaco today, what percentage would you say is tourism-based versus non-tourism based? Well,
tourism is part of the main, how can I say, attractions, and we are trying to have a very high-end resorts. But it's also, I wouldn't say that it's minor, but what is even more important are congresses, because it attracts a lot of convention. Yes. So Center of Congress. But again, you know, it's very important. But I would say I'm not sure. It could be around maybe 10%.
Okay.
But I'm really not sure. Yeah. I would refer you to the website of the Institut Monégasque de la Statistique des Études Économiques. It's IMSEE, where you can find all the figures.
Let's turn to the United Nations,
yes.
Where you have been for several years now. It's hard for any country to assert its agenda at the United Nations, particularly if one is not a member, a permanent member of the Security Council, which only 5 countries are. What strategies do you employ to get Monaco's agenda and priorities attended to within the UN system?
Well, first of all, I think that when Prince Rainier III, the father of our Prince Albert II, who's now reigning, it was really to have Monaco recognized as a sovereign state by the Concert of Nations. And the United Nations was and still is the only multilateral organization where the entire world...
It's where you go to get your hand stamped.
Exactly. So, but when you become a member, you indirectly recognize the existence of all the other members, and you have to abide by a certain number of international treaties, and over the last 2.5 decades, because it's been 25 years now, we ratified more than 60 treaties. You know, we were very lucky from the beginning, because the Crown Prince, who was the Crown Prince at that time, was designated by his father as the head of the delegation. And since then, and even more since he has become the head of state in 2005, it's the priority that are set for the international agenda by the Prince, and because he's very active in the environmental field. And so for us, you know, and it's very interesting, because the first resolution that Monaco ever co-sponsored, it was the resolution on sport for development and peace, and the item was brought in 1993 when Monaco became a member. So afterwards we became, you know, small states are the majority of the UN General Assembly. And we are a member of the Forum of Small States. Of course, we have way less than the 10 million threshold population that is considered to be, where you are considered to be a small state. And then it's interesting, because of course you have the group of 77 in China, which in reality is more than 77 members, and then you have depending the subjects, you know, the Western European and other state group, for which Monaco is a part, can vote with the countries from the group of Latin America and Caribbean states. So it's interesting, depending the subjects are the patterns evolve. But I would say that for small countries in Europe, it's the positions are mostly what the Western European and other state group are voting. Then you go down to the European Union, and if the European Union is divided, depending the subject, you know, it can be more the south of Europe from the north, because the Nordic country may have on certain position more liberal decisions. So it depends, but you have to find something where you're very active, and for us, for Monaco, it's easy, because the Prince is so active. I mean, it's easy. It's not easy to follow his leadership, because he's doing so much. But you know, for example, this year Monaco is the co-chair of the Coral Reef Initiative. Of the International Coral Reef Initiative. Yes. And of course, we've always been very active in the Law of the Sea. I've chaired a meeting of the state parties of the Law of the Sea back in, I think, 2012. And another diplomat was a vice chair last year. We had an expert elected to the Committee on the Right of the Child, that is from the treaty body, from the Convention on the Right of the Child. He did 2 mandates. We've been part of the Commission on Social Development for a mandate. One of the diplomats is this year part of the Bureau, the Vice President of the second committee. The diplomat who graduated from your university, Fairleigh Dickinson, yes. She was 2 or 3 years, 2 sessions ago, I think 2 or 3 sessions ago, the rapporteur of the 4th committee, which is a special political and decolonization committee. So, you know, you have to find ways where you can, and Monaco is neutral. So, of course, we are part of the Western European group.
No one is neutral.
Well, we let's say that because of our size, maybe we are open to all the kind of discussions, and I think this is what the UN is about. You have to accept to talk to people and to try to find common ground. And it's not just about the Security Council. You know, unfortunately, the media just report what the Security Council cannot achieve, but when you think of the UN system and what the entire system does for the everyday life of everybody, you know, telecommunication, health, to name but a few, UNESCO is extremely important also. So
there's the Security Council, and then there's the other 95% of what goes on within the UN system.
Let's say that, you know, so far, whatever the criticism, it has spared the entire world from another major conflict. I think that now the UN, the Secretary General is really bringing a huge change in the way that international multilateral negotiation and strategy are done, because it's more and more internal conflict, or where we need regional solutions and more involvement of regional organizations.
Whenever anyone asks me about, you know, the failure of the UN to fill in the blank, I like to remind them that we've had thousands of years to screw this planet up, and the UN has only had about 70 years to try to fix it. I mean, does it take that sort of mindset to grind ahead with issues like the environment, when there's so many factors that are arrayed against?
I think only the UN can, it's the only place where policies can be generated at the highest level by the entire world. So when you commit to the Paris Agreement or to the Agenda 2030, then you have to go back to your own drawing board, each country to its own capital, and say, okay, so what do I need? And the UN is there, and I think it's the way where we're going now. You know, with the high-level political forum that was created in Rio, and with the national reviews, it's about to deliver to the citizens of each country. The governments have to say, okay, this is Agenda 2030. These are all the SDGs with all the targets. What do I need? And then you go back to the UN system and say, okay, I need assistance to establish a marine protected area, or I need assistance to help me set up health policy. It's, you know, the UN cannot do everything.
No, cannot do everything.
You just try to bring people together and then to build up on cooperation and specialized agencies.
Certainly countries that are trying in good faith to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals can look to the UN system for technical assistance, maybe not huge amounts of money, but certainly a range of different kinds of assistance. It's the countries that just don't feel like abiding or pursuing the Sustainable Development Goals, including our own, that really trouble me.
Well, you know, again, the resolutions adopted by the General Assembly, only, let's put it the other way, since you had mentioned the Security Council, only the resolution adopted under Chapter 7 of the Charter by the Security Council are enforced. Okay? All the others resolution, it's the goodwill of the state. So it's, you know, the UN gives you a framework and a place to exchange and to try to build consensus. But then again, you know, first the UN cannot impose, but the UN is there to help state, and you have the World Trade Organization, the FAO, High Commissioner for Refugees, and all those agencies, you know, with the money they distribute, it's saving lives of millions of people every day. So that's why I think it's not fair to criticize what is not working. It's true that the UN, to be more, to keep its relevance, let's put it that way, needs to be closer to the people, because the charter starts with the people, and it may be complicated for we the people to understand what's beyond the language used in the resolution. Sometimes, you know, but it's so complicated, because when you negotiate at 193, you know, for example, we try to reduce the number of items on the agenda. So, but then you come to very sensitive questions. So, you know, even if we don't discuss for years now the question of the Falklands, Malvinas, do you think that the PR of Argentina can say, okay, you know what, I have agreed that it should be out of the agenda? It's impossible, you know, the shortcomings are there, you know, but we have to look beyond that. And the new secretary, well, not new anymore, because it's been there almost 2 years, and it's really bringing huge change. First of all, we have a gender parity in the higher, in his executive office. He's trying to really have a North-South representation. You know, it's not just about political correctness that all facilitation as a country from the north and a country from the south, so developed and developing countries trying to work together, because this has become the norm, and I think this is very good. But when it comes for experts, for example, it's not always feasible to bring experts from the developing countries to discuss some subjects, because we are there caught with restricted financing. But the UN, I think, is still relevant. It's still the only place where heads of state can go and speak to their counterparts all around the world and be heard. I think it's still very important. If it is the only reason why it is still important, I think it's worth trying to listen to one another.
It's let's think about it this way. When a Secretary General wishes to move an agenda forward, there's only 3 routes, right? There's sort of the technical route of reorganizing aspects of the Secretariat and departments and offices. There's the sort of the public route of trying to talk directly to the people of the world through media, which most Secretary Generals have been very reluctant to do. And I've wondered if that's because they know it'll backfire, or because we select Secretary Generals who are less charismatic than one might hope for in someone who is going to carry a message directly to the people. And then the third route is sort of the behind-the-scenes diplomacy of working on each country that's relevant for a particular problem, one by one by one by one.
I think that first of all, we have to acknowledge the fact that when Secretary General Guterres was elected, nominated, because presented by the Security Council for approval to the General Assembly, he had gone through auditions. And that was the first time. And you know, when we passed that resolution on the revitalization of the work of the General Assembly, preparing for this kind of exchange, we had 15 candidates, 8 women, 7 men. Well, at the end, and it was supposed to be the turn of an Eastern European country, because the UN had never had a Secretary General coming from that region. But what appeared very obviously to the entire membership is that candidate Guterres at that time had the real vision. He had been the High Commissioner for Refugees. Mm-hmm. He had been, most importantly, head of government in Portugal, and a very strong, opinionated person who likes to have the job done. And, you know, it was almost impossible not to choose him, I would say, you know, because he had that vision. So he carried that vision into his office. Of course, you always have to work with major powers, but his idea to bring more people from the south at the highest level, he said whenever he can decide as a CEO of the organization to do it, he's done it. So the other part is getting through the system to get more of a equitable geographic representation. People think that it's a rule throughout the system, but it's not. It's only certain posts that are mandatory be geographical representation. So, you know, he brought reform. In January we're gonna have 3 departments. He's trying to have peacekeeping more involved with you know, policy, preventing the crisis before they happen, and having one person responsible, that when a country needs assistance, they go and see one person, and then that person
rather than having 20 agencies in the field.
It's been, you know, even when a force is deployed, it takes months, and by the time the force is deployed, you know, the damage has been done on the field, on the country. So, but Secretary General Guterres, and I think rightly so, he doesn't often speak to the press because he prefers to work directly with people on the phone and not advertise it, because you cannot call a head of state and then go to the press and say, you know what, I call that head of state and say that what's happening in his country is totally unacceptable. You cannot do that. If you want to do prevention, mediation, you have to work behind the scenes. So it's maybe less glamorous than always going out and talk to the press, but it may be much more effective, especially now that we are in a very volatile environment. So I think this is very important, and so that's why, you know, it's almost well divided, where the Secretary General is more in charge of all those aspects of prevention and peace, and the Deputy Secretary General is really in charge of getting Agenda 2030 on the right track, but together. Because, you know, it's something that it's obvious. You cannot have development without peace, and you cannot have peace without development. You know, I always say that from the 3 pillars of sustainable development, so economic, environmental, and social, I always say I like to talk about the social pillar first, because this is what touches people in their everyday life. But you have to be realistic. If you want the social pillar to exist, you need growth. And this is something that for Monaco, that doesn't have natural resources, and the stability and the welfare state and everything, it's about growth, how to keep creating growth. It's the same for the world. If you don't create growth, you cannot pay for advancing. And the environment, of course, because what's happening now with climate change and the billions that are lost with those very terrible events. We just saw what happened in Sydney last night, you know. And in countries that are technically prepared or rich enough to overcome those but for the small island development states, it's a question of survival. And so and this, you know, again, the 3 are interlinked, but the way it is presented can have a real impact on the acceptance of people to do some efforts.
Let's talk a little bit about one or two issues in particular as they are affecting Europe and the world more broadly. You mentioned refugees and the Secretary General's experience in dealing with refugee issues. This has become a very, very pressing issue for most European countries. Has Monaco found itself needing to address the question of refugees?
Well, Monaco is a big contributor compared, of course, to his population to the UNHCR. I think we are the second contributor per
capita.
Yeah. But again, you know, because of security agreements with France, and we did welcome refugee families to Monaco. The government is taking care of them, paying for their lodging, putting the children into school. But this has to be approved because we are part of the Schengen agreement.
And
because nobody can access Monaco if you have not entered first a country in Europe, you know, and ultimately France. Yeah. So for safety reasons, we cannot just say, okay, we will take a number of families. It cannot be that simple. So we give a lot of contribution to the UNHCR. We took a few families from Christian from Syria, and we will go on Monday. We will be in Marrakesh, where the Pact of Migration. So this is different than refugees. The Pact on Refugee is being negotiated in Geneva, but for the migration, it has been negotiated at the UN. So it's a difficult issue, but we have to accept the fact that the same way that the world has been globalized, you like it or not, but you know, there was a big hope after in the middle 90s that the world would benefit entirely from globalization. Then, you know, of course, it couldn't be that simple. But I don't think we will stop people from moving. Also because the youth throughout the world is communicating by social media. I think we are in a transition period. Where artificial intelligence will certainly be the next big subject that the UN will have to deal with. We will need at a certain point, you know, come for cybersecurity, artificial intelligence. These are coming. We want it or not, it's going to happen. So it's like the law, you know. At a certain point, you need the society to evolve sufficiently to legislate it. It's going to be the same with those two aspects. But people are on the move. They've always been. It's more visible now because no news can be kept secret, you know. But I don't think it's going to be stopped. It has to be managed, and the same, you know, for remittances. It's a big part of the economy for so many countries. You cannot just ignore that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. When looked at from the point of view of an individual country, wishing first to control its own borders, second to protect its culture, there becomes a potentially ugly dynamic there. And we've seen nationalism rise and fall, not just in Europe, but across the world, but conspicuously in Europe. And these two dynamics of controlling the border and protecting the culture have yielded some of the most horrible policies the world has seen. Do you sense that we're entering that kind of space in Europe today?
Well, I hope not. You know, sometimes when I I'm overwhelmed by all the bad news that we all listen to. I start to wonder that maybe our children would say to us, how didn't you see it coming? Like.
I'm afraid my children will tell me to go back to Sicily.
Well,
no, first of all, I don't have children, and second of all, they would never say that if I did.
But it would be nice to go back to Sicily.
Well, I mean, it's the question, right? Particularly for countries that have had historic patterns of migration that were founded by migrants from somewhere else.
Yeah. You know, it's difficult because you cannot. Well, first of all, we are so blessed in Monaco to have an open society. As I said, you know, Monegasque are a minority in their own country, and we have, I think, around more than 130 nationalities represented, and these nationalities are the people creating the growth, the economic growth of Monaco. So, you know, Monaco is the contrary to what's happening. But also maybe because of the drastic rules to establish a business or become a resident, it's almost like you basically choose who you want or don't want. So it's more and more, you know, people will have to put rules to welcome people so they can integrate into the society. But I think the most important thing is for the people moving to be willing to join a community wherever it can be. And then, yes, you know, there are tensions, there is populism on the rise, there is nationalism on the rise, there are terrible things said by terrible persons, and the problem is that now...
It's when terrible things are said by good people that we need to worry.
Well, and that's why I think it's important, and this is where I would like more the big, you know, media companies to educate more the people, to go back in history, so we learn and we don't forget, and we don't go towards another disaster, because the way that there are so many potential disasters, not only natural disasters, but conflicts, and it would be terrible for the entire planet. So because nowadays, you know, everything is interlinked. So if something happens somewhere, even if a military conflict happens somewhere, it's going to affect the economy on the other side of the world. So once the economy goes down globally, then you are more prone to have conflicts everywhere. So no, it's very difficult times, but that's why I think it's very important to always keep in mind that those decades of peace that we've been through, well, at least in Europe and in the Western world, is worth protecting. But dangers now for any country, anywhere in the world, are those terrorist groups that are very volatile and difficult to identify and to eradicate.
Let's, well, before we open the discussion to the audience, are there particular issues or aspects of Monaco that you would like to discuss?
Well, you know, Monaco is a paradise. I mean, we are so lucky to be protected by a constitution, to have a reigning family that has always put peace and the well-being of its people and its residents first. That doesn't take anything for granted, because, you know, we are so small that we could easily be overcome. So that's why being part of the Concert of Nations for us is really trying to talk to China, to Russia, to the US, to France, to everybody, you know, Indonesia, you know, and the prince is a global citizen. He travels a lot. He with the Monaco's exploration, is campaigning to increase the marine protected areas, among other things. We have also international organization in Monaco, like the IAEA laboratories on the environment, where the Center for Ocean Acidification is located. We have the International Hydrographic Organization, so it's those are entities that really work for the benefit of the entire world, mainly, of course, on oceans. We are also very active. I am the co-chair of the Group of Friends for Development and Peace through Sport, and this is an underestimated factor for the well-being of everybody, because sport is really an equalizer, and it brings people together without
usually without.
Well, but you know, everybody is equal in sport. You can be for a wealthy family or from a very poor neighborhood, and then you have to follow the same rules.
Does Monaco send athletes to compete in the Olympics?
Yes, we do, and we also had athletes in the youth game which took place in Buenos Aires. So yes, sport, you know, education is very high in Monaco. Education, health, culture are a very important part of the budget of the states, and where the state invests a lot. And so it's children are really blessed. They learn to swim because it's part of the curriculum. As if they want to practice any sport, it's free of charge after school. And then if you're good, you go into the federation and you can qualify for the games. No, it's very important. Yes.
All right, let's have some questions from the audience. Is there a microphone that we can circulate around? You have to steal mine? Outrageous. All right.
We can put this one in the middle.
We can try.
Oops.
I'd like to see some hands of people with questions for the ambassador. The lovely gentleman on the aisle. And if you please, when you take your turn, stand up, introduce yourself, and then ask your question. I think you're going to be asked about money laundering. It's just a hunch.
Just introduce myself at the beginning. Can you hear me? Yes. I'm Professor Petros Anastasopoulos, and I teach, among other, economics and a class in international trade. That I have come here with a large group of my class. So I have 2 or 3 questions. Okay. If I can answer one at a time. One is technical. You mentioned at the beginning that Monaco has bilateral agreements with France. And I was wondering if these agreements, since France is a member of the European Union, apply to other European countries, or it is exclusively designed for France, and for other countries it has established other bilateral agreements with each country of the European community separately. That's the technical question. Should I answer the other 2 or the 3?
Let's have all 3.
No, all 3. The other question, I mean, I have been to Monaco and I have seen the geography, which is, Monaco is at a walking distance from both southern France and northern Italy. And I was wondering what historical conditions have created this closer relationship with France instead of Italy, even though it was established by the Genovese family. I mean, what part of Monaco's history there was this switch, let's say, to have such a strong link with France? Okay.
That's the second. You have a third?
Let's hold off on the third.
Okay. So bilateral agreements with France dated from the 1960s, and indirectly, and this was part of the very big subject that I was given to when I joined the government. For example, for insurance law, and we were supposed to adapt every time that France was changing a rule in the code of insurance to introduce it to Monaco. But basically it was too cumbersome, so we ended up just applying exactly the same thing. So this is all because it's just with France, because we, as I said, the territories, like the customs, it was the same. You have the same VAT applied on the same products, so it's just for France. That's why now that we want, for example, I'll give you something very concrete for you to understand why we need an agreement with the EU as a whole to have access to the market. Because we could manage, I don't know if you know the company Biotherm that was producing parapharmaceutical products. So to be able to have the EU label for safety, conformity, everything, we had to negotiate a specific agreement with the Commission. So now every time, you know, when I started in the government, I was going to the direction of insurance in Paris, and what my counterpart was saying, oh, but you know, you have to go to Foreign Affairs, and Foreign Affairs was saying, well, you know, this is a technical issue, you have to go to the direction of insurance. So it's impossible to work like that. So those agreements, and that's why on the banking area, we belong to the Eurozone. When the Euro was adopted, we have a specific Eurozone monetary convention where Monaco is part of it. So this was very important, and we signed it with France and the European Commission. But now the European Commission doesn't want to keep going for transport, because imagine the Master 1000, the tennis tournaments that take place in Monaco. Well, technically it's called the Rolex Master Monaco, but the Monte Carlo Country Club is geographically in France. Okay, so if you are you want to provide catering, people from Monaco cannot bring the food they produce in Monaco to the tournament because it's France, and it has not been approved to go through. So you know, you cannot, for us to keep expanding, we need to have that kind of wider agreement with all the sectors. The problem is that liberty of establishment, we don't want to give it up because we want to be able, because the territory is so small and the citizens are a minority, to always try to control who is going to come and live and work in Monaco, and also to keep the priority for the citizen of Monaco for certain branch of professions. So, but basically for banking, we had to go to with the European law, and the same with insurance, because you cannot just stay in 2 square kilometers. So that's why, you know, this is with countries from the EU and France with whom we had the agreements, losing part of their sovereignty that is given to the EU itself, we were obliged to deal with those specific areas with the Commission, and now we would like something broader to keep developing and have access to the entire market of the 27 countries.
And the second?
So the second, well, you know, through the centuries, Monaco, and it's in the titles of the reigning prince and the crown prince, have many titles from the French royals at the time. And the prince has made a point of visiting a lot of places in France where he has titles. So it's, and also some in Italy, but at the time of the Comté de Nice and the realm of Piedmont Sardaigne, you know, it's all part of history, and and Monaco at a certain point was also occupied by Spain, but we were always closer to France, and that's the territory has been part of the territory has been reduced when Menton and Roquebrune, which were two different cities that now are part of France, decided to join France because the state at that time was almost bankrupt, and so the prince had no choice but to let them join France and leave Monaco. So maybe, you know, with a bigger territory and with a bigger population, it would be more complicated to have so many benefits for the citizens. So at the end, maybe it was a blessing, but yeah, through the centuries, it's been the visions of the prince and the way they could manage to survive and to keep the tiny territory independent and sovereign.
Also, France as a state was developed much earlier than Italy, so this made earlier.
Well, the Italian Republic, when you think about it, it's very new because it was all divided in
May I ask the third, or I should keep the...
Sure.
Yes, the third question is, I was wondering if the political environment and thinking in Monaco follows the one in Europe. There is the conservative group, there is the liberal group, there are the environmentalists. Do you have some similar type of thinking and grouping and political, let's say, presentation? That is, there are groups that they represent this type of distinct views.
Because of the size of the territory and the population, it's you know, we have our parliament is called the National Council, so they are directly elected by the citizens of Monaco, and the government. So we have the government is a princely government. So the head of government is responsible towards the prince, not towards, because it's as I said, a hereditary and constitutional monarchy. So the prince is the ruler, and so this is very important to be sure that all the citizens of Monaco, notwithstanding their nationalities, you know, all the residents, foreigners, and nationals, citizens, are all given opportunities and treated equal. So even if the National Council, which is our parliament, is only elected directly by the Monegasque citizen, you know, they still have they propose text, they vote the budget, they cannot, they can propose laws and regulations, but it has to be taken back by the government to be officially presented for approval. So it's and this again, you know, when we joined the Council of Europe, it was one of the situations where it was very complicated for people to understand because the country is so small with such a small citizenship that it's really complicated. You cannot have two chambers or you cannot just have the government, well, because it's not the principles of the constitution of Monaco, but this is where the prince is really the guardian of equality of everybody living in Monaco. So it's, I think this, and again, you know, for the negotiation with the Commission, there was recently a visit of a group of representative from different countries to visit, because until you get there and you understand the dynamic, it's you know, on paper it's oh no, you know what, why is that, they have to do it this way, but it's impossible because we are too small, and it has been working until now, and both for citizens and residents it has been successful organization, so we would like to preserve it because I think it's what allows us to develop and keep going.
Just a quick follow-up. Are there party politics in Monaco as we understand them?
Well, as you understand them, I'm not sure that you could compare, but again, you know, there were two electoral lists competing for the national elections, and but again, you know, it would be interesting to see if, because we don't have a gender parity in the representation in the National Council, but it would be interesting to, because countries as liberal as Finland, I remember years ago the head of state saying in the General Assembly that they had imposed a parity in the boards of private companies. And at the time, you know, people were really upset and shocked, and then they realized that it was even better for the companies themselves, you know. So I don't know if we could do that, because we are such a small community. If tomorrow we would say, okay, you know what, you have to have a parity, it's more, I think it's for us, and also it's a Latin culture. We were discussing culture before. You know, it's still very much in the culture.
Patriarchal.
Well, I wouldn't say patriarchal anymore, but you know, in government, for example, we are more women ambassadors than men ambassadors. But we have one woman in the government. The government is 5 people. There is a head of government, and then we have 4 ministers. So we have a Minister of Public Work, who is a woman. We have Minister of Interior, Foreign Affairs, and Social. So it's difficult. You know, we have a lot of women that are directly under the minister as a director of a department, which is a ministry, but many women are civil servants, but it's something that has to come more naturally. You know, when you don't have such a huge demography, it's difficult to impose parity.
Yes, right behind you. And please introduce yourself.
My name is John Versa. I study international business here at Fairleigh Dickinson University. So this is regarding the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration that's coming up in December. So several countries, such as the United States and some other countries, have expressed serious reservations about the impacts on sovereignty that agreement would have. What's interesting is that several countries within the Schengen Agreement have expressed the same reservations. And so does that have any implications when countries that agree to a common travel policy have such a wide range of views regarding migration?
Well, you know, a few countries won't go to Marrakesh and won't be part of the Global Compact. The US, Poland, even Switzerland, who was one of the co-facilitators of the Global Compact, was my colleague from Switzerland and my colleague from Mexico, and everybody, even the Secretary General, recognized yesterday that they did an amazing job. It's such a difficult subject, and because it involves the integrity of human beings and their safety and the respect of their human rights and everything. So, you know, it's, again, you cannot, we're trying to, with that Global Compact, to have something that can be useful for every country to get its own regulation and legislation. But the Swiss Parliament is now examining if they're gonna go along with it or not. So this is democracy, you know. Every state ultimately has to take its own decisions, you know. And again, the UN can, and I think they did an amazing job, but you cannot impose. And I'm sure that when it will be probably adopted by acclamation in Marrakesh, and then when it's brought back to the UN General Assembly, there will be probably a vote, and there we will see which countries goes along and which countries. Some have already indicated, like the US and Poland and maybe Austria, that they won't accept it, so they will vote against, and we will have to work with that. But again, you know, we try at the United Nations to work on the best possible agreement. Some countries say that because of the rule of consensus, we accept too much the lower common denominator. But at the same time, if you want to keep the conversation going, you have to be respectful of others' positions. And, you know, it may be for the wrong reason or because, but at the same time, you know, the governments, the head of state and the head of government have been selected by their people. So everybody has to understand that and accept it. We cannot impose, and certainly not the UN.
The UN can cook the soup, but it can't make anyone eat it.
Exactly.
Good evening. I have a much lighter question. My name is Mark Sapara. I'm a member of the FTU Alumni Board of Governors. So in thinking about people of a certain time, myself included as a child, the only connection or memory or thought I had of Monaco was connected to the legacy of Princess Grace. And I think, you know, the majesty of the place was really about the fairy tale story. So 35 years after her death, what does that legacy still mean, if anything, in Monaco?
No. It still means a lot. Well, I've been 25 years in the United States, and I've gone every single year to the Princess Grace Foundation Gala. You know, Prince Rainier had established the Princess Grace Foundation in honor of Princess Grace, and they've been, the foundation has been supporting artists in ballet, theater, everything. And in Monaco, Princess Caroline really followed up into her mother's footsteps, and she is the one in the family in charge of the ballet. Culture is a big part. I think it's 5% of the budget of the state, which is big for culture. So the orchestra, but the standard was so high, and of course, sometimes people say that Princess Grace put Monaco on the map, and it was certainly true to the American people. And she's still very much adored. And every time that you know, a museum or an exhibition of her dresses or jewelry is going in China, all over the world. It's going to be, I think, in Montreal in February or March. So it's no, she still has a huge impact.
Thank you.
Well, I should stay while some others may think also. You know, she had established also, and this is also part of what Monaco is trying to do. When you are part of the United Nations, because we are very lucky, so the Department of Cooperation, International Cooperation, is increasing its foreign aid. And Princess Caroline, through the organization that had been set up by Princess Grace, which is called the World Association of Children's Friends, Association Mondiale des Amis de l'Enfance. So she works, she's very engaged in that, in many projects. And that NGO finances rehabilitation center in Africa for women victims of sexual violence, and she's also very active in creating small businesses for women in developing countries. And On the other side, Princess Stephanie is very active, and she's a goodwill ambassador for UNH. She's been for years. And Princess Charlene now has accepted to be an ambassador for the FIA for road safety, because this is, and you all either drive or gonna drive, but in developing countries, you know, car accidents, road accidents are killing so many young people who have to cross highways to go to school, or people riding cars that shouldn't be on the roads anymore. So this is a major issue. So like in many royal families, you know, they are very much involved in different areas where they can contribute to the welfare of society in our own small way. And this is, you know, I think that it's very much in the American culture that giving back, and you see it's part of the curriculum in many schools. It wasn't like that in Europe, and it's still not very much like that. But for in the international school in Monaco and the international university, more and more also in Europe, young people are asked to do other things, to get in touch with the real world. And so it's, I think, but it was very much part of the American culture, and because the three children were really and are still very much in touch with their cousins in America, it's that culture has developed and increased in Monaco also.
We can take one more question. Or you can join me in thanking Ambassador Picco and join us for dinner and some additional conversation down the hall.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.